Okay, here is another attempt at an answer to a question by Daniel Alvarado, however you wish to say your last name. Guatemala, I would say Alvarado. And Daniel had three questions. One is, as I remain faithful to my season and station in life, what advice or encouragement would you give to someone like me that is in a season that feels like a waiting period before being able to fully engage in what I feel called to? That's the first question. Let me answer it briefly. One of the things that as a pastor I would tell artists in our community is that we could see our station of life as a kind of exchange between nouns and adjectives. A noun is what we give ourselves primarily to in that season of life. Partly because maybe it's required of us. We have to provide for our family a living income so bread can be on the table. Partly because perhaps we need to do this in order to get somewhere else. We need to do studies before we can do our profession, or other kind of circumstances. So the noun is what you're primarily responsible for in that particular season station of life. Adjectives are things that can kind of be a part of, can sort of complement the substance of your life. This sort of breathe some fresh air, some qualifying characteristics. And those are things that you could do, as it were, on the side or on occasion. So a friend of mine who is a professional visual artist by calling Jim Dignett. In fact, he produced the painting right there on the cover of that book. And he was what was he? He was a maintenance, a maintenance man at I think the Performing Arts Center at the University of Texas. That was his day job for 30 years. That was his noun, occupationally speaking. But he did feel very clearly that his calling was to be a visual artist. And so he made a commitment to paint regularly I believe it was Tuesday nights and Saturday mornings. Twice a week, just a few chunk of hours. And he did that for, I believe, pretty regularly for 30 years. Jim is one of the most prolific persons I know, and his day job was not to make visual art. He was prolific because he kept doing something all along the way. He protected this bounded space to make art, and so he just kept making. And that was a way that he could cultivate and nurture this part of his identity and calling, such that when he retired, he was able to do, give far more time to this work as an artist. But there are, I think, little things that we can do. Sometimes we do have to give up some of our primary loves, but I think there are other things that we could do along the way. So when I was a PhD student, I was tired most of the time because the work was rather demanding. And I didn't do anything creative because all my mental energies and emotional energies were given to school, but I took up the habit of photography. I don't think I was a great photographer, but I tried to learn the discipline, the medium, asked a few friends for some help and advice, and then I got a good camera, and I would go out every once in a while and take photographs, and that satisfied, nurtured, maintained sort of this place of life and joy inside of me until I could get on the other side of this intensive season of study. That's your first question. Your second is, in my essay on Art for Faith's Sake, I write that the Spirit is the one who improvises, and just as the Spirit improvises, so we as artists are making the familiar strange. What do you mean here that the Spirit improvises? What do I mean in that sense? Well, let me tell you, the answer is in this book, For the Beauty of the Church, in an essay that Jeremy Begbie wrote called A Hopeful Subversion on page 182. He says, we dare to envisage the Holy Spirit weaving limitless, unpredictable improvisations out of the givens of creation, doubtless to the delight of us all. And then he goes on to say, what needs subverting here is the common assumption that there are only two possible basic shapes to our lives, order and disorder. And what Begbie's arguing is the Holy Spirit is the one that does new things out of the order or out of the given of our life, things that surprise us, things that we could say, that's a fresh work of God. That's a new thing that God is doing. So I commend the whole essay to you because I think it'll help you understand what it is that I mean, but essentially I am drawing on what he argues in that essay. Last question. In Begbie reading for this week, he writes, God's ultimate purpose for humanity is to call together a community whose life will reflect his own being as communion, as Father, Son, and Spirit, and in which human creativity should find its most potent expression, end quote. Daniel asks, do you think he's suggesting that our moments of most potent or best creativity will come when we are in community with others instead of in isolation? I think we have to be clear about the terms that we're using here. I don't think Begbie or I would say that your best creative work comes out of being in a context of actual human beings in the same room. That is, I as a writer, a poet, a songwriter, a novelist, a painter, am going to make my best work if I have other people inside the room that I occupy while I'm making work. That actually may be only true for certain media of art like musical theater, or certain, sort of usual forms of dance that involve another person, though they don't always. And filmmaking, it can be an autonomous individual activity, but largely other people are involved. So you do need it. You do need that communion. But that's not what Begbie is getting at. And certainly that's not what I would get at, because certainly there needs to be moments of personal, private, individual, alone spaces in which we can percolate and imagine and work and then, give birth to something that is creative. What he's saying is, because we are fundamentally, as human beings, created in the image of a triune God, that is, our image is a Trinitarian one that we bear out, like in our own self. Our truest self is fundamentally wired for communion. It is in this ongoing, largest sense of our lives being tethered and mutually dependent, interdependent, interanimated by others in this life-giving series of relationships, both with real people in our actual contextual lives, people that may live in other geographic places, and peoples across time and space, church history for that matter, or tradition. That is the womb of our truest identity, and therefore as artists we must also seek to have that kind of life-giving, relationally rich life. That is what we want to inhabit as a disposition in the world, rather than seeking to be autonomous or hyper-individualist, hyper-suggestivist, hyper-alone, isolated, and I think in a dysfunctional way. It's me over against the world. It's me, I decide, and then I tell the world the truth of the universe or something like that. But to say that my truest life arises out of community, subsists in community, and issues in community, regardless of the particular circumstances in which I am actually making works of art. So that's what I would say about that. I write about it a bit in this chapter, A Glimpse of the New Creation, in my chapter on theological perspectives on the arts. Yeah, that's primarily where I explore the question of community. A chapter in here, Josh Banner writes on the care of artists. He talks about community quite wonderfully. Many others do as well. So those are some answers to your questions, Daniel. I hope they send you in some good directions. Thanks for listening, y'all, and God bless you guys.